Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and since I'm doing a series right now on rebuilding my own bench press and trying to give people tips on building their bench press, and again, for those of you familiar with the project, I've been putting up footage every day discussing it in detail of what I'm doing to rebuild my own bench press after taking a year and a half off from benching and taking off a full year from actual direct chest work of any type, just overhead pressing. And one of the things that we need to keep in mind when it comes to building a bigger bench, people want to focus on a lot of the important stuff, good program on the bench, make sure they're eating enough, things like that. Obviously, these are things that everyone understands because obviously the food is a big deal, but recovery itself becomes a big deal. Recovery itself is a big deal. Now, back to the food thing, food can aid in recovery, but what happens when you're in the situation like I'm in right now to where I'm not gaining weight? My scale is going down slowly. I'm losing close to a pound a week. Well, actually, more than a pound a week. I don't know how much that's going to go down while I'm doing this bench pressing. But you can always eat your way to a bigger bench press. In fact, all the studies on the big three lifts, there have been studies on this, and they found that the bench press itself has a higher correlation to your body weight, meaning there's a higher association with your bench press improving based upon your body weight than the squat or the deadlift. Most correlated to body weight. And usually when people start losing weight, the bench press is one of the first lifts to get weaker. Not for everyone, but for the majority of people, it's near the top of the list. Pressing strength in general tends to go away, but bench press particularly tends to suffer. But we know you can eat your way to a bigger bench. Well, what about when you're not able to do so? What about when you're, in my case, where you're trying to lose weight? You're losing body fat, you're cutting. Now, granted, I'm doing it in an unusual way by using large volumes of cardio and still staying on high calories and high carbs. That'll make the recovery end easier at least. But normally, recovery becomes lessened when you do this. It becomes much, much harder to increase your bench press. You can't eat your way to a bigger bench press when you're not eating enough to gain weight. So what do? You have to focus more on the recovery end of it. And you can't focus just on the food end. Now, I would say diet will play a role in your recovery. If you aren't eating enough carbs and you're trying to not gain weight, you're trying to either recomposition or lose body fat, you better keep your carbs as high as possible, because without them, you're not going to get the recovery. You're not going to get the anabolic effect, everything else you want from your food, enough for your bench to go up. In other words, carbs, protein to a lesser extent, but carbohydrates become very critical. Dietary fat's not going to help you that much. People argue about that all day long, and yes, there are successful lifters who do keto diets, but they're the exception, not the norm. So keeping your carbohydrates high enough is going to be high on the list. And we're not talking about guys on a bunch of gear. Guys on a bunch of gear do stuff different. But keeping enough carbohydrates in your diet, that's going to be critical. The next thing you really need to look at is sleep. In my case, I'm training the bench 3 times a week with fairly high volume. I'm cutting. I'm doing a lot of cardio. You know what? I've been coming in and hitting a power nap right after I finish my bench press. Meaning, since I know that I'm cutting, I know that recovery can become an issue, particularly with a high specificity bench program like I'm doing. I'm putting a fair amount of taxation on my body. I eat carbs as soon as I get home and I take a power nap. I take a 15 to 30 minute nap after every benching session right now. Again, the extra recovery, same thing. I'm making sure that I get a minimum of 8 hours of sleep every night. And again, we come back to this same situation, recovery. Most of your muscle growth and most of your adaptation occurs while you're sleeping. All right, everything gets stimulated during training. Yes, as a hormonal response after training, as far as a cascade of hormones and balancing catabolism and anabolism and everything else. So yeah, that recovery is important. Getting some carbs in immediately. In my case, even getting a little sleep is important right there. But you may not be able to do that. So getting enough sleep at night is going to be critical, because that's when you're going to adapt. That's when you're going to recover. That's when you're going to get any growth you're going to get. Because at a certain point, you do need some chest and tricep growth for your bench to increase. Even if you're cutting, you are going to need to find a way to stimulate at least a little bit of growth, and that's going to require sleep. If you don't have the extra food to help you recover, you're going to need the extra sleep. Sleep is everything. Sleep is everything. In fact, I've known from even dealing with some professional athletes that some big pro athletes, like football players and things, they don't even focus on anabolics as much as you think they do. Most of those guys use way less tests and things than a lot of your gym rats do, way less. They focus on things that help with sleep. Sleeping pills, melatonin, pre-bed, GHRPs and things like that. As far as peptides, they focus heavily on their sleep. Why? Because they understand with the amount of stress they're putting on their body, sleep is everything. Sleep for them actually is even more important than even anabolics and things are. Again, sleep is everything, to the point to where they will use sleeping pills. It's really common among a lot of pro athletes like that who need to carry a lot of size and a lot of speed and power. And have to have a lot of conditioning with it. They focus on sleep heavily, the ones who are successful. Same thing with your bench press. Sleep, getting enough sleep, absolutely critical. And if that means that you need to eat a little bit of carbs before sleep, and you can do that still cutting, then do so. If you need anything to help you unwind or relax before bed, whether it's some relaxing music, all of that, do whatever it takes. But get your sleep in. The other thing, accessory movements. If you're really trying to focus on increasing your bench by using a high specificity program, again, like I'm doing, did 6 sets of bench 2 days ago, did 7 sets of bench today, not counting warm-ups, be very, very careful in your exercise selection as far as your accessories go. All right, that becomes important. And I'm not saying accessories don't have their place. Accessories have their place in building a bench. They have their place in getting through stalls. Absolutely. But if most people who are trying to increase their bench in any sort of quick manner, you're going to be doing mostly specificity of training. A lot of heavy benching, a lot of pause benching, maybe speed benching. You're going to be doing a lot of bench pressing. You don't have room for a lot of accessories. And the reason I say that, they impact recovery. And I don't just mean systematic recovery. A lot of guys will be like, well, you know what? 10 sets of tricep press downs isn't going to affect my recovery. That's nothing. You're right. It is nothing. But what about your connective tissue? What about your elbows? What about your tricep insertions, those tendons? That extra work can cause them to get inflamed. Now, people are going to say, well, this pro power lifter or whatever, these guys at Westside do this and that. Yeah, they do. They need, first of all, they need more tricep strength than a raw bencher. Number 2, they're on a ton of drugs. They're on a ton of drugs. If you're not on a ton of drugs, you may not have that luxury. And even then, it doesn't mean you're not going to tear a tricep just because you're on a bunch of drugs. You throw in a bunch of tricep extensions and you get some extra inflammation in your elbows and the connective tissue there. That's going to reduce how much you can work on your bench press because you're already doing a lot of volume. If you're doing a very high specificity program where you're bench pressing a lot with a lot of volume, a lot of frequency, trying to maximize your bench press, you don't have room for a lot of accessory work. And any accessory work that you do, you need to pick it very, very carefully. Maybe it'll be some overhead pressing. Maybe it will be some floor pressing. Factor it all in. Don't just start throwing tons of extra work in without really thinking it through, because what happens? You get inflammation from overuse. All right, or you get those muscles get too fatigued and you can't bench on your next bench press session. You might have been okay, but then you did those extra set of tricep extensions and your triceps aren't recovered. Now you can't hit as much volume. You can't hit as much workload. You can't do the things that you want to do on your next bench press session. Was it worth it? Not if your goal was to get your bench higher. Think through your accessories. When you're on a high specificity program, accessory work really should be very, very low. It should be no more than 10 to 20% tops, and it might not need to be anything. All right, but if you're doing a high volume of benching, trying to increase your bench press, particularly when you're not way overeating, you're not on a bunch of gear to help recovery, you're not on anything to strengthen your joints, your connective tissue, growth hormone, androgens, things like that. A lot of drugs guys out there use to improve their bench press. You're not on any of that. You're not bulking. Your recovery becomes critical. You need to seriously think through if that extra accessory work you're doing is going to cost you 2 or 3 or 4 extra sets of your bench press that week. Is it going to be worth it? In most cases, no. You're not going to have room for a lot of accessories, and the ones that you do put in need to be carefully thought out. Just one more thing that you need to think about carefully when you're planning everything. If you're going to not eat your way to a bigger bench, you're not going to drug your way to a bigger bench. Your recovery could be largely dependent upon how many accessories you throw in also. Again, if you're going to do any accessory work, be very selective in them and be minimalist in them at that point. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.